Recommends Podcast is a podcast recommending series and shouldn't be mistaken as a reviewing one. Opinions about each show are my own and should not reflect what each podcast has to offer. Content warnings aside, I believe if any show in my recommendations interests you, you should give it a chance, regardless of how I personally feel about the show.
What are you looking forward to the most?
I mean, occasionally seeing the sun could be nice.
Boo! Your pathetic addiction to vitamin D will only make you weak.
But Alice, my bones, they're ready to snap like twiglets.
Listen to me. Bones are a lie peddled by Big Milk to keep you buying. No such thing.
Right, so what keeps your body upright?
Spite and coffee.
Well, I'm afraid we can't all subsist entirely on coffee and social media drama.
Not with that attitude. I reckon you could crack it in another 4 years.
Another 4 years of you, and cracked is exactly where I'd be.
I'm gonna miss you, Teddy.
No, we'll stay in touch, right?
Course. If you think you can escape my iconic brand of nonsense by getting a boring, normal job, then you're going to be sadly disappointed, my friend.
You know, most people would consider civil service a boring, normal job.
Yeah, well,
Thanks to his good friend Alice Dyer, Sam Khalid was able to get a new job at the Office of Incident Assessment and Response. As long as you keep your head down, ignore the creepy voices from the computers, and just do the work, it's not really a bad place to work at. But when one of the voices brings up a place from Sam's past, would Alice's warnings be enough to keep Sam from digging deeper? Or is it too late to let things go? The Magnus Protocol is a side sequel series to the Magnus Archives, created by Rusty Quill, and it takes place years after the main show has ended. The Magnus Protocol is currently in its second season, but has a whole finished season, its first season obviously, completed already. So this show is, my opinions about the show is a little complicated, because when this was first announced, I am one of those people who hate unnecessary sequels. I don't think a show needs to keep going if it's unnecessary. I think you can do spin-offs of shows if there is a certain justification for it. I'm going to use like a couple examples. I'm thinking like, for example, Adventure Time with Fiona and Cake. Or Steven Universe with Lars of the Stars, which is that spin-off they just announced. I think those two are justifiable because although they take place in the same universe, they don't necessarily have to involve continuing on a storyline that has already ended, and feel like they would. I don't know what Lars of the Stars is going to be about, but considering it's going to be focused on Lars and his group of friends who didn't get nearly as much screen time as I hoped they would in Steven Universe, I can kind of guess that it's not going to be focused on Steven at all, which is fantastic. That is exactly what I would want on a spin-off. So this show, the Magnus Protocol, why is that related to the Magnus Protocol, is kind of a side sequel. So it does involve some of the characters who are from the Magnus Archives, but it does not necessarily involve like the exact events that happened at the end of the Magnus Archives. As a standalone thing, it's pretty good. I don't think you have to listen to the Magnus Archives to enjoy the Magnus Protocol. In fact, actually, one thing that would be a really, really cool, interesting experiment for me to do when the Magnus Protocol is officially finished is to find a friend who is interested in listening to both shows, have them listen to the Magnus Protocol before the Magnus Archives, and then I want to see how their opinions about the shows go about when they listen to it. That's just very interesting to me. My opinion about when the show first came out is I actually was kind of worried because although like I love more Magnus Archives, I was there when the finale for that show happened, and you know, I love the story for that show. I was a bit worried with the protocol because when something has too much continuation to it, I have like a whole video planned in the future for me talking about stories that get too long and are getting to the point where they're very easily like hitting that point of like this show needs to end soon, otherwise you're going to start losing people from it kind of deal. I wanted to do a whole video about sandboxes. It's relevant to sandboxes, but this is one of those things I was worried about with the Magnus Archives because the Magnus Archives is so good. And it knows what it is. It knows how to get from point A to point B without overstaying its welcome. Yeah, the show in general is 200 episodes, but if you like narrow it down to like what is the anthology part and what is the plot part, it knows how to pace itself, and that's what I really like about the pacing in the Magnus Archives. The Magnus Protocol has a similar kind of pacing, but it's more focused on like it has a lot bigger focus on the Magnus, like, unlike with the Magnus Archives, it has a bigger focus on, like, the character interactions and the stuff happening in the character's world versus, like, the stories they are reading or hearing about. And I think that it still has that nice balance to it. My worry with it is, like, I think about, like, Warrior Cats. To me, as somebody who like grew up reading Warrior Cats, I feel like this series should have ended with the 4th series, which was, I think it was Omen of the Stars. I don't remember, it was the one with Dovewing, and I feel like that main series should have ended there. Like, the 5th series is fine because that's a prequel series, but like, when they kept continuing from the end of that one with the like ones afterwards, I feel like that was just too much. And the like main storyline with these set of cats should have ended. If they wanted to keep going, they should have either done like something happened way in the past, like they did with the 5th series, or something that happens way in the future when all the characters we already know are like deceased. Not to sound mean about it. I don't know. That was my opinion. That was something I was kind of worried about the show, and so far it does a little bit of fan service. And when I talk about fan service, I mean not fan service in the way people usually think of fan service, but there's a lot of characters. And let's just talk about the first season. There's a lot of characters near the end of the first season who are in the Magnus Archives, but are not in the but are not from like the Magnus Archives. This is gonna have, if you're somebody who has not listened to the Magnus Archives yet, I'm about to get into some big Magnus Archives spoilers. Like, we get introduced to some characters who died in the Magnus Archives or were already dead before the Magnus Archives happened, like Gertrude and Helen and Trevor. We even get to meet another alternate universe version of Basira. Characters like that. And that's like a big thing that happens in the show. And I don't have that feeling of like the like what I get with like shows that like continue on past like their like quote unquote prime. With this show, this does feel like its own thing. And I, to be honest though, I am enjoying the 2nd season more than I enjoyed the 1st season, because even though the 2nd season partially does take place in the Magnus Archives universe, it does not feel as fan servicey as like the 1st season felt. And I'm really enjoying that aspect of it, and I hope it stays like that for the rest of the show. Not to say that I think the show is bad. I do want to preface this because I know I've been very like critical about like stuff of just like the nature of like what the show is. This is not me being critical about that aspect. It's not me saying I hate the show because of that. That is just my usual feeling about sequel things or spin-offs or whatever, is I'm generally very apprehensive of them just because currently with the way media is now, we have so much, and I feel like series would be better off if the creators could just accept that it's over and it's done and it needs to rest. And I'm glad that like Johnny and Alex did take a huge break from the Magnus Archives before doing the Magnus Protocol. I appreciate that a lot because like even with, especially after they talked about it, I do believe this is something they genuinely want to make and not like a thing they feel like they're forced to make. I am enjoying the show right now. Yeah, I do. To get back to a previous point I made, you don't have to listen to the Magnus Archives to understand what is happening in the Magnus Protocol. In fact, I think Alex did say that if you go into it with the mindset of somebody who has listened to the Magnus Archives, it could hinder your own like theory making for the Magnus Protocol, which I know is like a big thing in like the Magnus Archives fandom, is making theories. And both shows are like mystery podcasts. I kind of want to see what some of these opinions about the Magnus Protocol would be if they listen to the Magnus Protocol but don't listen to the Magnus Archives. It's that would be very interesting to me. To get to like some of the aspects of the story and stuff, I love the monsters in this show so much. I think Needles is one of my favorite, but I also love Mr. Bonzo. I really like Ink Soul. They suck. And then I really like the new one that they introduced at the time of me recording this, which is June 24th of 2025. Their name is Heinrich und Heimlich. I love him. He is great. He bought a chair for €60. I think the way that they do like the horror and the like quote unquote like fear stuff is very interesting. And like I said I like season 2 much better so far than I like season 1. Season 1 kind of has like this like half-baked love triangle that's like not really much of a love triangle, but it feels like one. And I hated it so much. It was just so... I don't know, I just did not like it. And I like the direction that the show's heading in now because I do not like the weird love triangle stuff. I don't know, there was just something off with season 1 I didn't like. But like into season 2 now, I'm like, yes, this feels nice. This is what I enjoy about my Magnus archives, I guess, that the Magnus Protocol is doing. Not that I want the Magnus Protocol to be like a carbon copy of the Magnus archives, I don't. But it was like, I don't know, there was something missing from season 1 that season 2 does right, and one of those things was not having the weird love triangle stuff in it, I guess. But the characters also are pretty good. I love Gwen. She is my favorite, which is very shocking considering how much of an Elias Bouchard hater I am. But I love Gwen. She is so mean, and I hope she gets worse. I also really like Alice, and I like Sam and Celia. There's not really like a character in the Magnus Protocol I hate, except for like maybe Trevor in the Magnus Protocol. He's probably the most annoying character in the show. He's awful, but I like a lot of the other ones. Heinrich and Heimlich is also another character I very much enjoyed, even though his introduction has been very brief so far. And also, in nature of like what everybody does know about the Magnus archives with some of the LGBT relationships in the show, this show does have queer characters. Alice, one of the main protagonists, she is trans, and Celia is pan, and so there's other characters. They did like a fluff episode with Collins, and Colin had like an ex-husband who got into crypto, and that's why they got divorced. And that is so funny to me. Just like, yeah. World's most bitterest man, who is also an IT guy, would also one day marry somebody who gets too into crypto and just turn them off from it. Now, content warnings about the show, because of course we gotta touch on to those. This is a horror show. Like with the Magnus archives, but there is a lot of horror stuff. This show has so much horror things. If you want like anything specific that they touch upon, like a lot, because the show does have content warnings, so if you are worried about individual content warnings, if there's certain specific stuff that like freaks you out and you don't like it, you could look at the episode descriptions and each of them will tell you like what's in the episode. But in general, I don't really think there's like a big in general thing that like consistently comes up. I know at the Magnus archives, like one of the things I talked about was like manipulation and police brutality, and then also like I think emotional abuse was another thing I mentioned. I don't remember. There was like a couple things I mentioned for the Magnus archives just because they popped up so frequently in the Magnus archives that like I felt like I should mention them just because they weren't like episode by episode specific like possibly triggering things to mention. I think it was emotional manipulation, maybe not emotional abuse, I don't remember. The Magnus Protocol does not have like one big thing that like I could be like, hey, this is consistently like prevalent through the show, so be careful of that. I would say like maybe the show is a little bit more sexual than the Magnus Archives is, but like not by much. I know there's like an episode that recently came out that touched upon like gender dysphoria, and then there's like some episodes that involve characters being ripped apart. Some of the one thing I will mention with the show that isn't so much in the Magnus Archives is when the stories are happening in the Magnus Archives, with the exception of season 5, but season 5 is also very similar in a way to seasons 1 through 4 compared to like the Magnus Protocol, which is some of the stuff that happens, the scary stuff that happens in the Magnus Protocol are audio recordings from things that have happened. A lot of the stories are being read by either these 3 voices named Chester, Norris, or Augustus, who Chester and Norris both sound like Jonathan and Martin, and Augustus, nobody knows like who Augustus is, but like the big running theory is that it's Jonah Magnus, but we also don't really know. I personally also think it's Jonah Magnus, but that's just, like I said, it's a theory. It's nothing that's confirmed. But there is some episodes that have, like, the horror stories are being told by the person the horror is happening to. So, like, there's this, like, one influencer woman, which is hands down worst episode specifically because she is the most, like, stereotypical influencer woman ever I've heard in my ears, and It is so painful to listen to, but it involves, like, an Ink Soul story and, like, horrible stuff happening to her after she got this tattoo from Ink Soul and this, like, online drama she got with Ink Soul. And it gets, like, a bit gory in that episode. And there's, like, some other episodes that have the same thing happen. So if you are fine with your horrible horror stuff being told in, like, a narrative sense versus, like, hearing it happening live, then that's just the thing to keep a heads up with. The stories themselves don't open up with being like, oh my god, my eyes are being ripped straight out of my skull, oh no, ah! It's like, it starts up and this character's just like, I went into the eye scooper house, and I am going to see if there's going to be, like, an eye scooper there. And then later on they'll be like, oh my god, the eye scooper is real, oh no, ah! Like, that's just generally how it goes. Overall, like I said, I'm very much enjoying the show now, much more than I did season 1. I don't know where they're going to take it. I hope it gets very spooky, very good. Lots of horrible things happen. It's a horror tragedy podcast. I want my horror, I want my tragedy, I want my everything that I enjoy about my horror tragedy podcast. And I also cannot wait to see what happens with these characters. I'm loving the character development, and I am excited to see where it goes. And also, if you're like, oh my goodness, are we going to have another 200 episodes of Magnus Archives to listen to? No, the Magnus Protocol is, like, the first season I think was like 30-ish episodes, and so the other 2 seasons, because there's only going to be 3, are going to follow the same path. But there's going to be, like, a lot of, like, bonus episodes because the Patreon, the Kickstarter did so well for this show that they have a lot of, like, bonus stuff unlocked. So yeah, if you haven't listened to the Magnus Protocol and the Magnus Archives, and you want to be my little guinea pig puppet, please let me know. I very much am interested to hear about your thoughts about the Magnus Protocol before listening to the Magnus Archives. Pretty please tell me. I would enjoy it so much. Now, as always, I will be linking any information about the Magnus Protocol down below. I will be linking Rusty Quill's Patreon. I do this with every single podcast I listen to. I will link their website. I will link anything that I feel like would be useful for people who want to learn more about the company and about the show itself. I like being nice like that. I do this series for free for you guys to watch, so you guys can find new little shows to scream in my description about, because I love hearing about podcasts. Now have a good one, and I'll talk to you guys later. Bye!